then I'm gonna just ignore mine. Okay, well it is 9:30, so I guess we'll get started. Well, it's 9:30 here in the US on the East Coast. And what time is it by you, Matt, exactly?
It is 2:30 in the afternoon.
2:30 in the afternoon. So yeah, this is new for us doing a daytime launch, but I'm kind of excited because you're not our first author overseas, and we have a few more, and this might actually work out better. So, people, can get on and not just have to watch after the fact, right? I know it's fun to be able to watch the people or people that you've been reading their books and watch them talk and be able to engage in some way. So for those of you who've tuned in before, the way we like to do this is we give some introductions, and then Matt will go and read from his new book, Ailuros. Here is a copy of it. It's a really fascinating book. It's a very different book. And for those of you who plan on reading it, hopefully you all do, you'll be probably intrigued by the setup. And Matt will talk a little bit more about this when he goes to read. But we'll give some introductions, then Matt will read, and then from there, we'll just do a Q&A with Matt. For those of you who are used to that, and those of you who are new, feel free to type in your questions in the Facebook comment box underneath the video. We will be monitoring that and asking those questions as we go. So we are so excited that you're joining us, and we hope that you enjoy this chat with Matt. It's going to be a lot of fun. Some of you might have had a chance actually to see him on another YouTube show, Visited by Voices, about a week, not even a week ago. Yeah, a week ago.
It was last Friday.
Last Friday. So it was just over a week ago, and you might have had a chance to see him talk there. If you haven't, we'll share a link to that video as well in the next couple of days, so you can kind of revisit that, because it's a really interesting discussion on horror and influences and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of really cool. But to start off with, my name is Emily Kudoviz. I am the editor-in-chief at Fractured Mirror Publishing. And next I'll do Allison and then Alex, because that makes sense. Allison, introduce yourself.
So my name is Allison. I'm coming at you guys from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am the art director for Fractured Mirror. So I was responsible for the cover design and then the very challenging page layout that we did with this one.
And we'll talk more about that. Probably we can show a little snippet of the cover. Hi, I'm Alex, for those of you who don't know yet. I was also the main editor for Ailuros.
Great. Thank you so much. And Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm an author from the UK. I mostly write things with a sci-fi grounding mixed with other genres, usually featuring LGBTQ protagonists. I myself am part of the community, so I try to write books that I just didn't have as a kid. I also run a pop culture website. I do a lot of cosplay. I've programmed a couple of computer games. So I'm just trying to keep myself busy as much as possible and be as creative as I humanly can be. So, and we were going to do a reading from Ailuros. I'm going to jump into the book a little bit. Now, because of the layout, which we've mentioned already, as you can see, it has notes along one side and the main text along the other. I'm going to read through the main text, and then we're going to jump back and read the notes afterwards. So what do you think about all of this? What happened here, you mean? I don't know. I'll tell you one thing, though. I've seen blood on the walls and a lot of damaged doors, but not one single body yet. That's creeping me out a bit. Josh nodded. I noticed that too. It's weird. There was supposed to be, 84 people here? We should have found someone by now. That's what I was. Rob stopped mid-sentence and looks over at the open door at the far end of the room. Did you hear that? Hear what? Hold on, I'm going to check it out. Rob pushed off the wall and moved out the door, leaving Josh still locked in place on the tattoo table. Check out what? Josh asked, raising his voice. When no reply came, he tried again, but louder. Rob? Josh's wrist display lit up and Rob's voice came through. Sorry, I'm here. I just thought I heard. Wait, that can't. Oh shit, get back, get. Rob screamed, then he stopped. The table still working, Josh was unable to reach his wrist display, so he started to yell, Rob, hey Rob, what's going on? Bang. A heavy bang rang out and Josh's head snapped around to meet it. It was coming from outside the wall that hid the hallway Rob had entered. Rhythmically, it started to move slowly toward the door. Bang, bang, bang. Josh panicked and tried to force himself free, but the straps audibly tightened in response. Come on, finish, he mumbled. Bang. The banging reached the edge of the door and stopped. Josh looked up at the empty door, breathing rapidly. Ah! Rob yelled, swinging through the door with a huge smile on his face that only grew when he heard Josh's high-pitched scream. The table let her beep and the tattoo machines at the tips of the table's arms flipped over, quickly applying a layer of antiseptic. The straps loosened and Josh floated free, turning to face Rob as he angrily pulled his skin suit back up. You absolute bastard, he growled. Rob laughed. I'm so sorry, I just couldn't resist. Well, maybe you should have tried a bit harder. Rob continued to laugh while Josh powered his clothing projection back on. Josh shook his head and looked up, opening his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Everything happened too quickly. One moment, Rob was there laughing, and the next, something floated up behind him, lurched forward, and dragged him back into the hall. Now Rob screamed again. But this was very different to the one he gave down the wrist display. It was full of pure primal fear. Then there was the crunching and the wet suction. Then Rob's cries became a choked cough, and disappeared entirely. Josh pushed off the table, moving slowly towards the door. Rob, what's... Josh grabbed a floor bar and stopped. Blood had started to float into view just beyond the doorway, the microgravity causing it to spread as though it was in water. Josh panicked. He grabbed the floor bars and hauled himself backwards, colliding with the tattoo table as he tried to turn and head back to the door that he and Robert had originally entered through. His body working on nothing but an instinctual need to escape. He was back at the hangar before he knew it. Going back to the notes. Actually, no, there's only one note for this section. Right, so the note in this section starts where? First, I've got to find where it is. Starts when the blood starts floating through the air as though in water, and reads, monsters are common symbols in dreams. In Carl Jung's work, they often played the role of the shadow. This is a representation of the darker side of the psyche. It's like the id in a way. For a lot of people, the id is based around the idea of going against societal norms, though while the shadow is going against both that and personal morals. Here, it's the subject's guilt and the way he views what actually happened. The scary thing is that it's existing at all kind of proves that you did do something wrong, at least, Josh. The conscience brings about guilt for doing wrong, and the guilt won here. That means your impulses were stronger than your conscience.
Thank you, Matt, for reading that. That's the first death scene, if I remember correctly, right?
It is. I apologize, I forgot how much swearing there was in that bit.
That's okay. I really like that scene. I don't know about you guys. That's a good one. It was definitely not expected. I wasn't expecting it when I first read it.
It definitely gets your heart pumping, I think.
Oh yeah.
It does. I think though you balance it with that humor at the beginning, like the fact that he's playing a prank, and then you think you're out of the woods and you're like, oh God, okay. Because I don't think up until that point you get a lot of horror in the book. You know something bad happened, and you know, but it almost feels like it's more of a not a mystery in the sense of Agatha Christie mystery, but a mystery as in what went on. And then you get to that point, and then you get the, oh good, it was just a prank. He was just pulling his leg, and then that. And it gets pretty bad. It gets pretty tense from there out. Like,
yeah, exactly. It keeps going with the horror from there out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't, I don't think you can come back from this. You can't just go back to, oh, it's only a mystery.
No, it's
a murder.
It's a horror. It's straight up horror after that. Like, thank you so much for reading that section in particular. So we have some questions as we get some coming in. But I guess I think maybe we should start with some questions about your style, because that is such a huge thing in this story. When you queried us originally, you're like, this is really different. And I think we all sat down to read it and we're like, this is really good, but it's so different. And so I think because readers don't have a chance to read it just yet, I think there's some things we want to talk about as far as the reading of it and the writing of it.
Yep.
So let's start with, so there's 3 forms of telling in this story. You have the narrative file recording, which is what you read, right? It's basically these recordings that they're pulling up from the ship. to see what happened. You have the discussions with Sarah, the interrogations with Sarah, who is one of our main characters, which is interesting because she's not part of all the horror that's going on, but she's a super important character. She knows a lot about all the stuff that happens before, and she can kind of give really cool insight into the characters as she goes. And then you have the footnotes, which deal a lot with the relationship between our two main characters. So I guess one of our questions is, which form did you prefer to write, and which was the most challenging to write?
I enjoyed writing all three forms, to be fair, because to a degree, there's not a huge amount of difference between the prose and the footnotes. They're very similar styled, and the audio transcripts, I've done a lot of work when I was freelancing, doing script work, which laid out the same way. I used to have an old web comic years and years back as well, and they actually had a couple of audio transcripts in too. So writing in the different styles wasn't too bad.
Okay. Were any of them, or maybe then, okay, so none of them posed a challenge really, and you kind of enjoyed all of them?
Yeah, it was more trying to make it all sync up that was the challenge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, you have obviously the main text is like this far future homage to Alien, and then footnotes are kind of this present day thing which changes the tone of all of it and shows a different side to the story, and trying to make sure that all fit in with the overall narrative and still left them both as complete stories. That was the hard part.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can see that. Because the comments, the footnotes from Alex are they're very different feel than the rest of it. I mean, they're very personal. I mean, that's the point of them though. So
yeah, it's supposed to be very raw, of a sort of very raw exploration of what all of this stuff that's going on in the other side of it could mean.
Yeah, which I think is interesting because you have the story of the ship, and it's a very real, physical, tangible story. It's what's happening. But once you start reading the footnotes, it almost becomes to me, it almost becomes a did that happen? Because you can see it all as just metaphor for their relationship and the struggles they're feeling. And I think that, at least for me, when I was reading, and I was very interested in their relationship, that to me, that was a very interesting part of it, because you don't really get Josh's side of the story. You really only get how Alex sees everything and feels everything. So it's a very one-sided story. And I think, I don't know, we'll have to ask what Alex thought in a second, because I'm curious. But to me, it almost kind of cast doubt on the actual physical story of what happened. It's like, did it happen, but is this all just how Alex is processing? Like, there was almost the ability to see it as that didn't actually happen. It was just how he has created this in his head.
I mean, it's one of those things where it did and it didn't, because if you go and read like the side stuff that I put up on mattdoormedia.com/Ailuros, it kind of shows that this whole, I think the best way to describe this, if you just read the right hand pages, what you get is a complete sci-fi horror story, set in the far future with this unprepared group of salvagers coming face to face with this alien monster. When you read the footnotes, it kind of goes into this idea that there's a scheme going on that's kind of government run to reduce crime by vaccinating you against particular emotional responses, like a suppression drug, and then you let it all out in the VR sim. So, the pages on the right, if you're taking the footnotes into account, are a VR sim. They did happen, but they happened in the head of the person in control of the sim. So it's still, you kind of get Josh's side of a story through that, I think. But just, you have to kind of interpret it a lot more, which is what obviously Alex is trying to do in the footnotes, to try and find out if Josh did cheat on them,
Right. Oh, which, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned your website. There is a lot more interesting information about this story on Matt's website. That if you don't follow him on Twitter, if you don't follow him on Twitter, please do, but we'll also post a link to that. And I believe the link is on our website under your name. If not, we'll make sure it's there before the book is up, because you get a lot more information to help read those other levels of the book, which is what Matt was just talking about.
Yeah, you'll get like a full background to the government process, but there's also I was running a weekly blog that's kind of like an in-universe story as to how like Matt Doyle would have got this book out if it was an in-universe real thing. So
right exactly. Okay, Alex, did you want to add about the reading of it? Do you want to add into that?
Yeah, I think that I would love your kind of recommendation for how to read it, because I think people can go about reading it differently. So would you recommend reading the right-hand pages first, which is the kind of main story, and then going back and reading the footnotes that are on the next page? Or do you think you should read, and then once you get to a footnote, pop back to the footnote, read the footnote, and then bounce back to the story and kind of zigzag like that?
I would recommend reading the right-hand pages first and then rereading with taking the notes into account, just because the notes do kind of flip the roles of some of the characters. You know, who's a hero, who's a villain, you know, whether their actions are wholly good or bad. You know, you get a very clear depiction of that on the right-hand pages, and then the footnotes, as I say, some of them, it'll just flip it around completely depending on how you feel about the characters. So I think it's worth doing it that way so you can get that initial feel for them and then see what happens when we change it. But at the same time, you know, there's nothing wrong with flipping back and forth with the notes at the same time, or flipping back and forth chapter by chapter. And again, if you didn't want to read the footnotes at all, you'll still get a full story. So, you know, it really comes down to how any given reader feels most comfortable reading it. You know, that was important with the writing of it, to give that option of how to read and enjoy it different ways.
I think so. I agree. I think that probably is a good way to read it. I mean, you wrote it, so you would know better, but I think that's probably a really decent way to read it. I think though, if people read, would you recommend the same thing if people read the ebook version? Because the ebook version makes the footnotes easier, right? You click on the footnote and it pops up and it's right there in your face. Do you agree with this? Do you still stand by the same method for reading there?
I'd still stand by it, because
okay,
it's a different method to do it, but
right. But it's still
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, guys, definitely listen to that, because like you'll open the book and you might be intimidated, and you shouldn't be, but I can totally understand being intimidated. It's different than
definitely.
we read. So I would definitely take into account what Matt said there. I think it's probably the best way to read it. So what prompted you to play with the narrative style? Because we're talking a lot about you have 3 different styles in there. You have the recording, the footnotes, the interrogation. Then you just told us how you think we should go about reading it. So what prompted you to actually play with style?
I want to do something a little bit different again. We were talking a little bit before we went live. My original self-published series is one I still describe as quite scrappy. The Spot from Chronicles. It's kind of what happens if you leave me to my own devices. But that played with different types of text depending, you know, which chapter you were reading. And when I moved on to do the Cassie Tam files after, that was a lot more reined in, a lot more straightforward as a narrative. I still, you know, I really love those books. You know, some of my tighter work, I think. But when I'd finished that series, I felt like I didn't want to retread the same ground. I wanted to look at doing something different. And, you know, I'm a big fan of stuff like Daniel Uski's House of Leaves or Stephen Hall's Raw Sharp Texts, things like that, that really, you know, try to get a visual element to how the books work and just present stories in a different way. Because I think stories, they aren't as static as we sometimes give them credit for. I think a lot of people do just expect stories to look like, you know, prose on a page. You have your short paragraphs, you read them one after the other. I like the idea of stories being something that can evolve as you read them, and, you know, leave things a little bit different for you, so you can just pick different things up every time you do go back to it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because we before this started, we were having a conversation about different books with different styles that do affect how we read. And you're right, books are not just static. We're so used to other forms of media that, especially video games, you're sure it makes me think of this. There's a lot of video games that we have a lot of control over story. We could play through 4 times and get 4 different endings on a lot of the different, RPGs, and books don't feel that way unless you have a choose your own adventure. So yeah, I think it is important to remember that books are not static. Stories are not static.
Yeah. Visual novels, again, they're a good sort of in-between ground on that, I think. Obviously, they have gameplay elements, but then multiple endings as well. So
exactly. And your book doesn't have, a book doesn't have, books in general don't have that ability, in the sense of I can't go back in and reset. I can only go back in and start the book from the beginning. But that doesn't mean that they are static. And I think that's a really good point to bring up.
I think one thing that affected this one as well is I mentioned this briefly on Visited by Voices, but this didn't start out as a book. This started out as a screenplay. My original intent for it had been the right-hand pages were the core thing, and then you'd have the footnotes as like an audio commentary that you could put up as option over the top of it. Because I've been watching a lot of like what was the Black Mirror interactive one called? Bandersnatch?
Bandersnatch, yeah.
I've been watching that, and I'm kind of thinking back to when My Little Eye came out on DVD, and you could pick the camera angles and how you had that sort of interaction then with visual form as well. So Ailuros started out with that sort of thing intended. It's just as I got further in, it kind of felt like, no, do you know, I think this might be a book.
What caused you to get to that feeling of that it might actually be a book?
Because the more I was trying to refine the script, the more it felt like it would be better served with the interlinking description between speech for the most part. It kind of felt more like there's more here for me to explore in that way.
Yeah, there's a lot being explored in here. I could see that. I'm trying to imagine how this would be filmed. I don't know. Have you, Alex? You're about to talk.
I think it would lose some of it, because even when you're reading, sometimes the physical text, the words are a little bit morphed and not exactly what they should be. And that tells part of the story. And if you don't have that in front of you to see, I think you're kind of missing out a little bit.
Oh, I mean, they're very different experiences, obviously, film and book. I think a lot of people forget this sometimes with adaptions, because there are some things you can do in books that you can't do in films. Like the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, there's a massive chunk in that you just have the guy going through like old news articles and photos. You couldn't show that in a film because you'd have like an hour of nothing going on, So, it would be a very different experience. I think that you'd have to do something with it to make it clear that it's a slightly different experience. So, I think otherwise, you'd be losing too much, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if it were turned into a film, that'd be actually pretty cool. But yeah, you would lose some big chunks of at least Josh and Alex's story. I feel like it, for what we see on the page, you would probably get other aspects of their story in there that, that we can see things manifest it differently, but we'd miss some of that rawness, I think, of Alex. It's just so important.
Well, I suppose, again, you get the right performance for it. You can get a lot across in, how you put it out there.
That's true. Yeah, I'm thinking about that now. Okay.
If Netflix want to come calling, I've got a half-finished script.
Hey, there we go.
It's basically done.
Yeah, pretty much. This would actually be very visual. When I read, especially anything fantastical sci-fi, which is pretty much all of what we do, but I love to envision the creature. Like, that was fun to envision. It was such a horrific thing to envision, because especially that scene where there's a scene where they walk into what I guess is the ballroom, or a ballroom like room, and remember, all these people have been dead and they're not finding bodies. The ship has basically been abandoned, right? Which we find out really early on in the book, that's why they're scavengers. And there's a scene, I'm not going to talk about the scene too much, but it was one of the most hard-hitting scenes for me. And that was when they walk in his room and they see what's going on or what went on.
Because then all of a sudden what these creatures do becomes very real.
Very real. And I just, it was so hard to envision that in my head because it was just so horrific. But it'd be interesting to see someone who can translate from written word to, especially someone who's very skilled with horror, from written word to image, what could happen with that, because that was just, let's see.
Do you know what I think the hardest part of getting it on film? Because most of it's set in microgravity. So you'd have...
it would be all CGI.
Yeah, because you look at how they did it in like, what's the one with Ryan Reynolds in Life? Because that was all microgravity, and that was so much hard work. You know, it's the sort of thing that would be so much easier to translate animated, I think, rather than live action, just because of that.
Oh, I think that would be pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool.
I would like to see that, I think.
I think it'd be really, and animated work can be really horrific too. Like, I think sometimes we see animated as childish, but it's not. I'm thinking of when I took my mother to first see an anime, and all she could remember was Speed Racer, and how she hated it because she remembered Speed Racer as a kid. And I took her to see a Studio Ghibli film, and not horror, but she was blown away. And we have so much power with animation that we lose when we go to CGI. And a lot of times books are turned into animated films very effectively. Yep. So yeah, we got totally off there on visuals of this book. You started answering a question that we had, and I guess I'm going to kind of rephrase the question a little bit, because you said you started writing this as a script. But so when you finally decided to switch to narrative and not script, did you write the two stories, basically the left and right hand side pages, at the same time, or did you kind of write the right and then go back and fill in the left? Because you started it as a very completely different format.
Yeah, the way I was doing it was to write the right hand pages first for a chapter, and then go back and do the left hand ones. Then what I would do, obviously, when I'm editing, then would be, as I'm writing the left hand notes, I'd start to refine the right hand a little bit. Then when I start to go back and re-edit the right hand side, then obviously I've got to go and edit the left at the same time and switch back and forth. The key was doing it chapter by chapter. Having an idea of where I was going with the right hand pages was more prominent. And then I just had loose notes on the left-hand pages to what the characters on the right represent and how that's going to motivate their actions on a very core level.
Okay.
The hardest thing I've ever written. I kind of got partway from, thought, this is an absolute nightmare of a project. Why am I doing this myself? But I got through it. So.
And it turned out great. I definitely think it was well worth the effort, but then again, I didn't have to do very much, so maybe I shouldn't talk.
So what Alison had to do most of it, because obviously dealing with the layout. So
yeah,
hey, Alison had fun trying to figure out that layout.
Yeah, I know that whenever we took this project on, that was one of our big questions, is because when it was given to us, it was in a Word doc format with the footnotes at the bottom of the page. But we had to figure out a good way to put that into the book form. But I really love how it turned out. Oh,
me too. Me too.
Yeah, I think putting them on the left-hand side was really effective. It's interesting because when I'm flipping through the book right now, and the story, the right-hand story is actually pretty short when you look at the page length. Like it's when you look at the fact that half of this book has small little bits of text on it, and some pages have none. The story is really short, but the story is so massive.
Yeah, I think that was how Lorne described it. Was it thematically dense, but it's a quick read.
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah, it was, because talking about the structure, and now you have so much going on in it, and you have so many big ideas, but space-wise, it takes up very little. And I think that's just a really that made this whole process of setting it up, I think, for a little bit more challenging to really bring out the fullness of your story and the best possible format. And I hope our readers feel the same, because it really is a tremendous, tremendous story. So I guess so just generally now for you, for everybody, we can come back to the book in general. Well, I guess one more thing specifically about the book, the word Ailuros, which it took us forever to learn how to pronounce this word, for the record. I think we've looked it up and listened to it, and I know I said it wrong for so long. It's from ancient Greek religion, right?
Yes.
So how did this become the basis? What prompted you to make this such an important part of your story?
It kind of happened randomly, because I was trying to figure out how to tie this all in together, and where Alex calls Josh Puss Puss during it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd initially decided to go with Bast or Bastet.
Okay.
But I thought, I don't know, it's such a commonly used deity to reference. I thought, are there any ways I can sort of alternate this and find something that's maybe going to sound like a little bit of a better fit for the type of story? And when I was reading into it, I discovered the Greek equivalent of Bastet was Ailuros. So
Okay.
I thought, actually, no, that has a really nice ring to it. I can work with that. So it just came about by accident that way. And I think I've mispronounced it like the first 100 times I used it as well. So.
That makes us feel a little better, because we had some struggles. Definitely me. I definitely had some struggles. Okay, so I actually didn't realize that. I didn't realize Ailuros was the kind of Greek counterpart to Bastet.
Yeah.
Huh. That explains a lot about the nickname. I like that. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's Ailuros. Ailuros. I feel like I need I think I had it sitting on a Post-it note for a while on my computer, so I need to say it right. So hopefully, because do you guys ever get that thing where you read words in a book and you don't really know how to say them, because in your head you say something, but you don't know actually how to say them? Yeah, that was the problem. But we have to talk about these books, so we can't just sit with them in our heads. We
can't
have
just
to
head
say
along.
them. Yeah. So I guess some of these questions are now a little broader about you as a writer in general. Do you typically gravitate to sci-fi or horror? I know you write with a lot of LGBTQ characters. I know some of your other, and I know you do a lot of sci-fi, but what is your favorite thing about writing in these genres, sci-fi and horror? Specifically horror, I guess.
A lot of it's because I grew up with genre fiction. You know, I was, a big fan of stuff like Star Trek: The Next Generation, but at the same time, when we got free roam to just pick books from the library at we'd call it primary schools up to about 11, they had kids versions of the Pip and the Pendulum and things like that, and I kind of gravitated more towards that than the more generic sort of kid gets picked up and gets to play for their favorite soccer team, or the romance novels and things like that. I think with sci-fi in particular, it's always because even the more bleak end of it, there was always something that I could look at as quite hopeful. Some sort of advancement that made me think, I want to see us get to there and be able to do stuff like that. So it just kind of seeps into my work quite regularly. I said usually as to do with the setting more than anything, and then I'll put other things on top. Obviously this one, there's the horror elements, there's the experimental element. With the Cassie Tam files, it was all crime noir, but in a sci-fi setting, and there were bits of horror creeped into some of those as well. So again, horror is one that's just stuck with me since a babysitter let me watch A Nightmare on Elm Street, and spent the whole night singing the nursery rhyme up the stairs to me, so I just didn't sleep that night at all. But horror's been with me ever since. Every school project after that where we got to write fiction, it was always horror. It was always the robot clowns that went mad at the circus, or the serial killer hiding in the alley and things like that. And it never stopped for me. So
horror is an interesting genre, I think. I know you talked a little bit more about your influences on Visited by Voices. I remember you mentioned some of those books. So for anyone watching, we're going to post a link to that if you've missed it, where he goes into a lot more depth about those inspirations. because I think they're really fascinating. But for those of you who are watching, who've also watched that, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do like, I think, didn't you say Pit and the Pendulum, the children's version, was the first horror one you actually did read?
The ones that I picked up, that and it's not strictly horror, but like Hound of the Baskervilles.
Oh yeah.
So and they were like teeny tiny versions like that, you know, about 30, 40 pages long. So really, really cut down and huge text as well. Like one side, here's a big picture and here's about 30 words, you know.
Right.
But you know, it was good. It was good enough to grab you and then sort of launch you into other stuff. You know, that went on to like Point Horror and Goosebumps and things like that, and built it up from there. So
Goosebumps. I remember Goosebumps. I loved Goosebumps. Those were terrifying as a child for me.
Yeah. Some of them.
Yeah.
I'd say as well though, with like the sides of it, like the genre, don't be put off if it's not the sort of thing you normally read, because I know certainly with horror, people get this expectation that's kind of based on whatever's big in the cinema. And they kind of think the same thing's going to apply to books. You know, like for a while, like all horror, I think was supposed to be super gory because slashers were big. Right. But it wasn't. There was more to it. And, you know, now I think people maybe struggle with the idea that if they don't tend to read horror, they kind of look at, well, the films are all very jump scare heavy.
Right.
Going to be trying to work the same thing in. How does that work with a book and so on? And, you know, same with sci-fi. I get a comment a lot that's I write sci-fi for people that don't like sci-fi. And I really like it, because if I'm like someone's gateway into other stuff, then that's fantastic. But I think a lot of it is because I don't focus on the hard sci-fi. You know, the sci-fi elements are there and I try to keep them vivid enough that you can really picture them, but I don't put the whole focus on it. It's more about the characters for.
I think that's really important. I think earlier we started having a discussion. I know we had a discussion with Lauren a couple of days ago about horror film, and like, I know for me, I'm not a fan of horror films. Like, I don't like gore. I don't like that. But I think I said to you before was I've actually read a lot of horror novels, and you're right, they're very different. I feel like, and I don't have and I think horror in general though, and this was coming from a conversation we had the other day, Alex and Allison, in case you remember, with Lauren, that horror is very much an interesting genre because it really tries to get at our fears as human beings, and it puts a face to them, a face that's easier for us to face. You know, if we're so deeply afraid of something as human, I don't think we're so deeply afraid that someone's going to come in and hack us to death. It's just, you know, to take that trope of gory horror film. But what is that fear actually addressing? That, you know, I don't know, depending on the movie or the book, whatever it's really addressing, that fear that we can't actually face. And I study and work with a lot of children's lit, and children's lit, a lot of times people dismiss the same way they dismiss a lot of genre fiction. I think it follows the same problem. But it's these ideas that in literature, we have this ability to really find these safe places for people to work through those fears. And I think horror, I feel like horror does the same thing. Yep. And your book definitely touches on it. It's so many different fears coming through with your story.
And it gets a little bit sort of metafiction with that as well, because it's I can't remember if it's in one of the notes or if that's on the website, but it does outright state that the whole point of the creature, in terms of when you look at it, when you read the notes and look at it as a VR sim, is it's supposed to represent your big fears and, you know, your worst habits and the things that you feel guilty over. It is there to give you that outlet, and it's designed to give people who use that system an outlet. It's like described as because it's something apart from you, it gives you enough distance from it to look at it and study it and try to work through it without it becoming too personal, because that's when it gets harder to start working through stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that is on the website.
Yeah, I think it might be.
Yeah, which is why the website is so, I think, useful to look at, because it's.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say, Alex? Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing.
Okay. So what is your favorite thing about writing horror?
I suppose it is that kind of trying to bring something to the table that will make people face something that they're not as comfortable with, which sounds terribly cruel, and I don't mean it in a cruel way. Because a lot of horror does come down to interpretation, though. You know, you try to find little bits of yourself in there and little things that maybe creep you out or that worry you, and you apply it to little pieces of it. And that's what I like doing with it. I mean, as a kid, certainly it was more, I think, shocking people because, you know, it was actually in I wrote a horror story in high school. It was like on our first English lesson in high school. We were told, you know, write a story and we'll read it out the second one. And I know that almost every kid there wrote one of two stories because all the girls were writing, you know, meeting the handsome prince and falling in love. And most of the boys were writing the sports-based stuff. And the teacher specifically asked after a couple, has anyone done anything different? And I thought, yeah, I did. And I remember reading out the story of it was a homeless person walking through the back alleys, and he comes across this girl with like this rusty knife and these matted ginger dreadlocks, and then she ends up chasing him through the alleys and killing him. And it was a wonderful experience because I got to the end of the story and the whole room was silent. And I thought, well, maybe they don't know it's over at the end. And there's still silence. I sort of look up and everyone's just sat there like. And for like a couple of like months after that, I could walk into any room in that school and people knew who I was. I was like, that's the kid that wrote the story about the ginger girl killing the homeless guy. And I have no idea who these people are. It's like the closest I ever got to being popular. So I cherish that shock value.
I love that story. I feel like today they would have sent you down to the guidance counselor and been like, Matt needs to see you and talk to you for a little while.
It would have been worse. Oddly, some of the ones I wrote when I was younger, because some of the stuff they got up to in the robot clown stories was, you know, the teachers looked at it back in like the 90s as, oh, well, he's being creative. But I do know some of the stuff in that would have been caught at least home to the parents.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to say that because that's a definite thing that as a teacher you have to kind of balance and hope you make the right decision. Is the kid just really creative or do they need to talk to somebody? I like that story though. Actually, we got not a question but a comment from one of our viewers, August. She said, I think a lot of that, I think related to what you're talking before, I think a lot of that has to do with how horror film evolves. Cinema can easily rely on scary imagery. Horror novels need to be more creative with their way to describe the things that really freak you out, which I think is a good way to kind of sum up what you were talking about. It's the differences there. We don't have that ability to shove it in your face.
I think that is a big help for it because when you have, it's described to me once as I forget the name of the horror film. It might have been House on the Hill. You hear this moment where like you hear the banging coming down the hallway, which is what got referenced in the bit that I was reading there. Yeah. Banging on the wall, bang, 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 and then the door starts to sort of slowly creep out. But what made that scene so scary, even back in the 40s or 50s when they made it, was that you didn't see what's behind the door. Your mind's left to picture it yourself. It's like if you see a 30-foot tall spider, it's like, oh God, it's a 30-foot tall spider. Well, at least it's not 50-foot tall. But when it's on the page and you're not getting that full description and your mind's kind of filling in the blanks, you know, your mind will go far darker places than any visual medium will take you because it has that freedom to be creative with it. Whereas when it's on that screen in front of you, you know, it's there, you know it's there, you know what you're looking at. And that could be really effective too, but it's a different format. It works in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our minds are scary. They're powerful.
I also think that for each person, it would be unique because they would be thinking of their own deepest fear if it's not fully described. So they're thinking what's scariest to them, but that doesn't always match what's the scariest to the writer or another reader. It's very subjective.
Yeah, I think what you said there, Alex, really is important. It's that subjectivity is what makes, I think, horror so powerful. When you can't see it, like with the the monster, even though we get described the monster in your book, it's still it's not something based, it's not an earth-based thing that we can fully understand. So there's still a sense of, I don't know, nebulousness to it, even though you're describing a physical thing. And it allows us, like Alex just pointed out as well, to, what's the word? It allows us to really kind of transplant what we were feeling, what we're afraid of, what we're worried about into that face.
Funny thing is, that monster's been around me for a while now as well, because there was like an older version of that creature in the webcomic that I mentioned earlier. I know when I got the first couple of panels back, the artist working on it, after a while, she said she just can't draw it. It makes her feel physically ill to draw this thing. So it always kind of had this really cool effect. Chronicles, it's on one of the cards as well. One of the cards that they use in the card game, there's a version of it. So it's one that I've kept around for a while. This is just the first time I've tried to really flesh out how it works and what it is. And a lot of that was inspired by Carl Hill's Because Science videos on YouTube when he was doing a lot of the space-based stuff. It kind of made me think, how could I make this thing work in microgravity? What would it need to be for that to be, feasibly workable and realistic? So
I think you've managed to make something very real. So I think you managed to make it work. That's kind of interesting though about the artist who just can't draw it. It just it has such a visceral reaction to you.
I think that's so cool. I feel like that means like you're doing something right.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's see. We have a question from August this time. Sheree said, I know a lot of authors get a lot of real world inspiration for their books. Do you have anything that inspired this book?
Yes, because the governmental system in it with the emotion suppressing and then the VR sims from a story standpoint are like populated by your brain. Everything comes from like brain scans, like portable MRI type stuff, and builds it up. And this is all real technology. That's what inspired that side of it, because it was, I came across like a news article where in Japan, they'd done this experiment where they got people to look at different pictures and, memorize them. And then they would get them to sit there and think about one picture, just focus on it. And the computer would like brain scan and try to recreate what they were thinking of. And they always came out quite blurry, but they were quite good because you'd have like one, there was like two ducks facing to the left. And then when they did the brain scan, the computer recreated two ducks, one facing to the left, one facing to the right. So knowing that technology to do things like read minds and recreate this in a very physical format was there, that kind of got my mind thinking to how would we use this if this was like HD 4K quality stuff that we were able to do with it. And the Salvagers story, that is very unashamedly a homage to Alien, because I absolutely adore that film. And, I watch it several times a year. It never loses the effect for me. So, but it's a homage, very much a homage. So. Yeah,
you could definitely get Alien vibes in here, which is a lot of fun for those who love Alien. And it's a huge franchise, Alien. I enjoyed the stories. Yeah, you definitely get that there. But that's actually cool. I didn't know that stuff about the brain scans.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen it on stuff. In fact, I was watching an episode of House the other day where they kind of tried that at one point. The person, they give it a shot, and I didn't actually realize it was based on anything real. Because
where they were getting to move the cursor up and down for yes and no questions?
No, they were actually trying to see what the person was. Was the person not able to speak or hear? There was something weird. The person couldn't communicate somehow. I wish I could remember the episode, but they were trying to take break. They thought it was, some of the doctors thought it was a joke. They were like, this is stupid. This is a waste of our time. But they were taking scans of the brain as the person was dreaming, I think, to see if they could see what they were dreaming. I don't remember what it was, but they were saying there were studies, but TV shows often say there are studies, and I didn't actually realize it was based on anything real. So it's kind of cool to hear that from you.
I think it was Kyoto University did a lot of it, and there's talk about you could use it for things like if you had a crime committed, You could, try to use it to go through someone's recollection of events to see if maybe they were at the scene of the crime or anything like that. When you can't find the fingerprints and things like that. So there's all sorts of ways you could apply it. And it would be really, it'd be really cool. I just get the feeling that when that technology is perfected, it's going to be used nefariously at some point.
Oh, I'm sure.
At some point, I think right from the beginning, it'll be in a bad way.
Yeah, Alex, you might be right. It's a very dangerous piece of technology. It could be. I wonder though if it would take away. You mentioned the thing about crime. I wonder if it would take away the subjectivity. Like, is our brain actually processing things objectively? Like, if I were to ask you what you saw at a crime scene, you're going to remember it based on elements of what you saw and trauma and whatever experience. But I wonder if your brain does that.
Yeah, and you get the problem then as well as if you're asking very simple questions like, were you there? Well, you might well have been there. It doesn't mean you were there when the crime happened. Or you might get an image in your head of, well, what happened here? What could have happened? Maybe this is what happened. And then, it just gets filled in for you then as to what went on.
Yeah. That's such a cool thing. That gives me a renewed. I mean, I'll read this book again because now it's fun to read it in a paperback version. But as I read it, I'm going to actually probably end up paying more attention to that concept because that's such a cool thing to me. Science and technology is really fascinating.
What I'm hoping for. I'm hoping this is one people are going to want to go back and reread and try and find new things and hunt out like the 7 hidden paragraphs and things like that. And, just trying to see what they can glean from it.
This is one that's very easy to go back because you can't get the whole story in one reading. It's just not possible with just the way the story is constructed. You can't get it all in one reading. You'd miss out on so much.
Yeah. And you can interpret so many ways as well, which again was intentional. I wanted this to be something that people can take different things from, and maybe start discussions about what did you think about this, what do you think it means, and things like that. So
you said something a moment ago that I think is really interesting to hit upon. The hidden passages, the secret passages. Do you want to elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah. So there are 7 hidden paragraphs in the book, spread across. You'll notice things popping up that's like jumbles of numbers and blanked out sections and things like that you can find if you figure out how to translate them into different types of language. They give extra information about things, and if you find all of them, it does actually alter the ending of the story on the right hand pages, and in doing so that then completely alters what happens in the left hand pages with regards to whether they've interpreted this correctly or not, because obviously they're working on the basis of what's in front of them and what they're seeing. So they were fun to try to work in the best way. That you could argue there's sort of maybe 8 because it's not too big a spoiler. Whenever you see the creature mentioned as the creature, you get certain letters capitalized. And it's always the letters to spell out cheat or cheater, because that's what Alex thinks that the monster represents, the idea of did Josh cheat on them.
Right.
But that one's not really, that one was kind of put in, one, because I thought it was a nice touch, but 2, to kind of maybe hint that there's more hidden away in there, just less obviously than that one. So. Right.
Yeah, that's actually, does your website go into any clues for that, or is it just purely based on the readers?
The website, because the blog posts are kind of written from the standpoint of a fictional me having a bit of an emotional breakdown over this whole thing, and what happens to that character in the lead up to the book. He does mention it briefly and states that there are these hidden paragraphs and points you to where to find them.
Okay.
But doesn't say how to translate them. So it gives you an idea where to look, just not how to dig.
Okay, so if you're up for a challenge, it's definitely worth doing. Yeah, that's actually a really cool thing to have in a book. I feel like you see books that are created to be puzzle books. Like there's a lot of books out there that are created that way, but this one, doesn't come across that way. It's not a puzzle book, but the fact that you have those hidden paragraphs in there that they could totally change the entire story is super cool. I think a lot of readers are up for that challenge. It also kind of gamifies the book. For people who are very much part of a video game world, you created that interactive element that could be really fun.
Yeah, I mean, to give you an idea of what sort of stuff is in there, like it does one character that dies in the story. It does actually, one of the novice characters survived, and that changes a lot of things. So again, I'm not going to say which character it is, because a lot of characters die. Most of the cast dies.
A lot of them die.
Don't
a lot of them die.
But...
yeah, there's a few. So I really hope readers will probably also mention that in a post, just so they should keep their eyes open in case they miss the viewing of this or don't go back and read. I think it's something worth sharing. Like, look for the hidden paragraphs, because it changed. I think that's a really cool element of this story. Something you don't see very often. So we have a question that was then followed up by another question from another from a viewer. So I'm going to kind of pose both of them at the same time because they deal with the same idea. Our question was, what authors and books are you inspired by? And August asked, as a horror author, do you have any favorite horror film? So she's going back to the film idea because it's come up a lot. So basically your inspirations or favorites from both of those books and film category.
In terms of authors, I read across a lot of different genres. So like Sir Terry Pratchett is an absolute favorite of mine. One I really wish I'd had the opportunity to meet before he passed on. When it comes to the horror stuff, in literature, a big fan of, if I want short fiction, I tend to go for like a Ramsey Campbell or a China Mayville, Neil Gaiman as well. If I'm looking more for novels, Poppy Z. Bright is.
I love Poppy Z. Bright. Wow, it's been years since I've heard that name.
Yeah, I love Poppy Z. Bright, like Exquisite Corpse and Dark Souls. Was it Dark Souls or Lost Souls? I can never remember.
Lost Souls.
Yeah, Lost Souls.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Again, it's been so long since I've reread them though. I love the people who, like I said before, Zaniolewski, Steve Hall, the people who really try to mess with form and make this something more than we're maybe used to.
Yeah.
In terms of film, that's a hard one. You'll find with me, I'm more inclined to move towards film with practical effects than CG, because CG I find looks like CG when it's on screen, no matter how good it is, with the odd exception. Whereas if you have like a practical effect, a crap puppet, it's still something physically in front of the actors. So I'd love that. If I want something more sort of body horror-y, I'll go for like the Fly remake, something like that. I thought that was really impressively done. Big fan of werewolves. Absolutely love werewolves. So like American Werewolf in London. So that transformation scene is so painful to look at even now.
That is, wow. I remember my dad and I watched the film. That is a very
it's just brutal. Nothing's beaten it. So when they said recently they're going to remake it with the director's son, he's going to do it by CG apparently, and I thought it's not going to be as good. But so it's like that. Sticking with werewolves, The Howling, Ginger Snaps is one that I don't hear talked about quite so much anymore, but that was just such. I don't know if a lot of people maybe picked up on this, where Ginger Snaps is obviously supposed to be like the allegory for puberty. There was an old werewolf film called A Company of Wolves that did the same thing.
Okay.
So it kind of felt like Ginger Snaps is like a modern reimagining of that. So they're all good. I love some of the weirder end of Asian horror as well, like Marabito was one that really got me. A Tale of Two Sisters, that was remade as, I think that was The Uninvited in the remake.
Oh, okay.
But the original really creeped me out. There's like a scene where there's like someone underneath like an oven. And I remember watching it when I was living with my parents. And after the film, I've got to go out now, go to bed. I've got to walk through the kitchen past my parents' oven. I don't want to walk past an oven now. So those ones I would definitely put right up there for me. Okay? But give me anything that relies more on practical than CG, and I'm probably happy. Even if it's terrible, I'll find something to really love with it. So I'm easily pleased with it.
Easily pleased. I mean, that's not a bad thing by any means. So Matt, I guess our final kind of big question for you is, what's next for you? What are you working on? Are you working on anything right now?
I'm working for a long list of ideas. And I recently got the rights back to, I'd started like a middle grade horror series.
Oh, wow. That's fun.
Which it just really, the first book ended up with the wrong publisher. And, you know, I ended up changing a lot of stuff in that I didn't, maybe really shouldn't have. I like years back self-published the second book, but I never got around to the other two. So I want to rework those into something something stronger. I think now I've got a bit more experience behind me with the writing.
Yeah.
There's a couple of ideas in my head for other ones that would be messing with the form a little bit into how you read the book. Again, especially when it pertains to like having hidden stuff in the book and, you know, books written partially in code. The trick with that is making sure again that both stories are cohesive, so that if you don't find stuff, you don't miss out on the story.
Right. Right.
So there's those two. I've got a couple of short stories in mind as well. So a couple of anthology calls I've seen that I kind of want to get into. And I want to write a werewolf novel because I've not, for all the love I have for the creature, I've never written a werewolf novel, and I'd love to get my own take on that and see what I could do with that story.
That would be really fun because you do love them. I mean, you mentioned several movies with them too, so that'd be kind of cool to see. I think I was really fascinated by your first comment about the middle grade horror series. Yeah. Middle grade readers love horror. Like they are some of the biggest consumers of horror I've ever met. So I'm sure that would be a lot of fun when you kind of make it what you want it to be.
The problem with that is I find certain scenes in like that original book, I didn't know if I was trying to push things too far with it. Because obviously there are more limits on a middle grade horror for what you can and can't show, I think, certainly in terms of the language. So
yeah, the language I think is probably the bigger thing. That's what they see. But middle grade is a really difficult grade to write for because they're a lot of times their stuff can really edge into YA with a lot of the allowances YA gives to readers, but they're still 10, 11, 12 years old. They're still babies in a lot of ways. But it's a challenging group to write for, but they are huge readers. They haven't gotten jaded about reading yet. I know we led our third graders to the library for the first time yesterday, and they were so excited by the books. Like they're not excited about a lot of things, and they were thrilled by all the books they got, more than my high schoolers were when I taught high schoolers. They're like, whatever, it's a book. So
you hit high school, but I think kids either fall into that category where they still love to read, or they kind of think, oh no, books are dull now.
But as kids, they're just excited to hear stories still. I think that's what it is. Well, Matt, I want to say some things to wrap us up, and then I would like you to shout out your social media channels. And we will, for anyone watching who misses it or who just prefers to see things linked or written down, we will link you those as well. But Ailuros is coming out. Ailuros is coming out September 7th. Paperback, hardback, and ebook. It will be available through all major chains. You can pre-order through us, but I just, if you aren't aware, the state of the shipping world right now is horrible. We are still waiting for our copies to come in. Matt, I think, has half of his copies in. I would suggest honestly waiting. If you want your book right away, Amazon still magically can ship. Or if you have a local bookstore that does quick shipping, I would suggest probably not, I hate saying this, but I would suggest probably not pre-ordering unless you want to pre-order from us. And also you want, some people like ebooks as well, and you want an ebook too. But I would suggest probably waiting till the day it comes out, because you'll get it probably faster than you'll get it from us. Our things are still in shipment, and they've been there for a while. with that said, though, we will also, if you did want to buy from our website, we will have the ebooks available as of the date it comes out, September 7th. Or like I said, all major book retailers will have them as well. So please pick up a copy. As you've heard today, and if you watch Visited by Voices, which we'll also link, the story is really fascinating. Matt has put so much into this story. And it's definitely one you can read more than once. And I think I'm not alone in saying, I hope Alice and Alex will agree that this is a super cool ride. And I never found those hidden passages, by the way, so I'm going to have to go through and read them again too. Alex, did you find them?
I cheated.
You cheated. Well, you needed to.
I got it given to me.
Well, I guess you needed to, so that's fair. You had to make sure it all worked.
I know exactly what happens.
Well, I need to go back through and read. Is it worth it? As an outsider reader, it's worth it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good. That's definitely then. Yeah, I need to go back and now reread again, which I'm totally okay with. And Matt, where can we find you on social media if our readers want to?
Yeah, I'm mostly hang out on Twitter at Matt Doyle Media. You'll get a mix of stuff about writing, whatever. I just feel like posting for the day, and links to my website posts. The website is mattdoylemedia.com. If you want the Ailuros site specifically, it's mattdoylemedia.com/Ailuros. Also have a Facebook page for that under Matt Doyle Media, though it doesn't get used quite so much. And there is an Instagram page under Matt Doyle Media Projects, which I need to start using again because I stopped using it a couple of months back and I can't remember why. But those are the main places you'll find me. Twitter's probably where I'm most active.
Awesome. And we will make sure that we will post your Twitter. If you follow us on Twitter, you've seen us tag Matt several times, but we'll make sure it's posted here as well, along with the website address so people can get to you, because I think it's worth, you guys see his other books, where you can find his other books if you like his style, and learn more about this book. And just, yeah, you post interesting reviews and stuff. You're fun to follow. So just all around good person to follow. Thank you everyone who has tuned in today, and we really appreciate you, especially if you're on the US soil. The time change and day change is definitely different. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And I hope that anyone who tuned in from overseas, where it's the middle of the afternoon, I hope this worked out better for you if you've not been able to see our other times. And I hope you guys enjoy this book. It comes out in a few days, so be ready. Thank you. And I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend. And thank you again, Matt, for joining with us and talking.
Yeah, thank you.
Today. We really appreciate it.
Matt.
Bye.